This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
All right, so we talked about Browns who might return. Let's talk about the Browns who might not return. Now, the good news for people is that a lot of the big names, they're not going anywhere. And even some of the medium names, they're probably not going anywhere. As much as you'll hear about 26 free agents and all of this that the Cleveland Browns have, most of that core is very easy to retain. And even some of the players that might be able to walk, those guys, if the Browns want them back, it wouldn't be too difficult. I know that people make the Browns salary cap situation seem like they have no room, but they have a lot of flexibility. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Is I want to talk about the Browns' upcoming free agency, who might become a cap casualty, and what the Browns might do to kind of skirt around the salary cap in order to kind of keep guys, and not just keep guys and free up, but also free up space to get more guys. And I know it sounds like it's impossible, but the Browns do it every year. I'll tell you exactly how they're going to do it. So two main orders of business that need to be taken care of. First, for the Cleveland Browns, is that's going to be restructures, right? The Browns need to restructure a couple of deals. The first one is the one that the Browns are going to restructure almost every offseason. That's going to be Deshaun Watson. They're going to restructure that deal this summer. Part of Deshaun Watson agreeing to this deal is agreeing to the restructures. They're going to restructure it. By restructuring Deshaun Watson's deal, his salary cap hit goes from $66 million for next year to $33 million. So the Browns will kick that down the road. Now, what the Browns are doing with the restructures is that they're using cash to get rid of cash on the salary cap. Now, you can't get rid of the whole cap hit that way, but you can hit some of it. Also, what the Browns are doing is that they're betting on the NFL salary cap rising. So what they're doing with basically, restructuring Deshaun Watson's deal, paying some of it now, having some of that hit the cap right now, and some of that guaranteed money hit Deshaun's bank account right now, they're going to lower their cap hit for 2024 to $33 million. That $33 million is going to go on to next year. But the more years they kick that can down the road, the higher the salary cap raises. And then you get to a point to where that number, while high, is not salary cap breaking high. Or you can void it out in the last 2 years of somebody's deal, give them like a faux kind of extension. There's a bunch of different ways you could work around it and spread that cap hit out through multiple different years. But that's basically what the Browns are doing, is that they're spreading the hit out and betting on the salary cap rising, which it has risen pretty consistently for the last 5 years outside of COVID. And if the salary cap keeps rising, then the financial impact for the Cleveland Browns of that bill gets reduced each year that the cap rises. The cap is projected to rise for the next 4 years. So they're going to continue to kick that can down the road. So they're going to restructure Deshaun Watson's deal to $33 million. So that $66 million cap hit you've seen is going to be reduced to $33 million. Denzel Ward is a player that they can reduce the cap hit on by $10 million by restructuring. I expect them to do that. And all of a sudden, those two players, you just freed up $43 million in cap space. I think you're 16 in the hole. So you'll be about plus 20 million, plus 25 or even 30 at that point. Now there are some players that you could free up some cap space by giving them extensions that are also players that you might just want to give an extension to. The two that I think of are Nick Chubb and Amari Cooper. Now, Nick Chubb is somebody you probably give a year or two extension to on top of his deal because he's set to be a free agent next offseason. So in order to make sure he doesn't hit free agency next offseason, you probably want to give him an extension. You give him an extension at $13, $14 million, which is I mean, we paid Jed Wills more money than that, but you give him an extension at 14. If Nick Chubb really wants it, you can give him 16. It's really not that big of a deal. Running backs don't make that much money. And you can kick some of that money down the road. You can also reduce his cap hit by $8 million. So it's $8 more million that you saved. If you give Amari Cooper an extension, you can kick some of that money down the road the next couple of years when the salary cap goes up, and you can save yourself $15 million in this salary cap cycle. So now we're talking about $25 extra million. On top of that, the Browns would have about $50 million in cap space. After this, they could extend Zadarius Smith as well. Now, I don't think that reduces their cap number at all, because most of the rest of his deal for this year is wrapped up in void years. So you might reduce a penalty in 2025 and 2026, but you're probably going to kick it down the road to like 2027, 28. I don't think that makes that much of a difference, but they'll probably, if they want to bring back Zadarius, they'll probably work out an extension to do something with those void years that I am not Harvard educated enough to know exactly what they're trying to accomplish. So they're probably going to do something with Zadarius if they choose to bring him back. And if they do, that's the avenue in which I believe they will bring him back. I don't think they're going to bring him back on an all-new deal. I think they would bring him back on an extension. So Amari Cooper is another interesting one that I just mentioned, because I think in the absence of Nick Chubb, we learned how important not only Nick Chubb was, but Amari Cooper was, right? Because there was a thought that this might be Amari Cooper's last year as a Cleveland Brown. I don't think that's as popular of a thought now. Now, there are going to be some people who advocate for it. I think Amari has proven himself as far too important to what this team wants to do and far too difficult to replace to what this team wants to do to just simply get rid of him because of his salary cap number. I think Amari is firmly in the class of player where, hey, if their salary cap number is an issue, let's work something out to reduce it for this year and pay it down the line. So Amari Cooper, I think that's why they'll work out an extension with him. Same thing for Nick Chubb. You saw Nick Chubb's value. We all know that Nick Chubb is somebody who's going to bounce back. If you do want to extend Nick Chubb, this would be financially the most opportune time to do it, because Nick would be more inclined to sign a couple year extension coming back from a knee injury, not wanting to hit free agency 1 year post a knee injury. So he would be more inclined to want to extend his deal by at least a year. And financially, you would be inclined to do this because you would save some money on the back end, because he's probably not going to demand $20-30 million. So that being said, I think that those two deals could get done this summer. And then you have other things that might dictate if a player is gone, like Greg Newsome's 5th-year option. Now, this is something I talked about in my calendar video for the offseason schedule. Greg Newsome's 5th-year option is going to be a serious point of conversation, because his 5th-year option is going to cost the Browns $12 million in 2025, right? And that's not a ton of money, but it's not necessarily what you pay a nickel corner, right? Like a third DB, a specialty DB. Usually you're not paying that guy $12 million. Now, again, the market might rise to where that makes sense for a third DB, but $12 million is kind of high. There are also some other guys who might become what I like to call 5th-year option casualties, where they're not likely to get 5th-year options. And because they're not likely to get 5th-year options, but they're high enough draft picks, teams just want to get rid of them to get something back. Think of Kyle Pitts, whose 5th-year option is set to hit at 10.5, and J.C. Horn, whose 5th-year option is set to hit at 11.2. Now, Greg, despite being picked after JC, has a higher projected 5th-year option because he's played more on the field, and playing time goes into the algorithm that decides what your 5th-year option is going to be. Greg has a lot more playing time than JC Horn. So, yeah, that 5th-year option, $12 million for Greg Newsome. I think the team probably does it, right, as insurance on injury to Denzel Ward. And just to have that luxury of having those 3 corners, it might be worth it. $12 million in 2025 for 1 year, especially if they feel like this team is in win now mode, right? If this team's in win now mode, you can't really sacrifice some pieces to get a slight downgrade to save a little bit of money. I think that you probably keep Greg Newsome here with that 5th-year option. But $12 million is not nothing. It's not nothing. Now, they kept Jed Wills, who's a full-time starter at left tackle, for 15 on his 5th-year option. So 12 would be less than Jed's 15. But you have to also consider that JOK is going to be a free agent next offseason. That money has to go somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. You can Zadarius Smith, Amari Cooper. If you extend if you extend Amari Cooper, if you extend Nick Chubb, that money's going to get kicked into the can of when that free agency is. So maybe the Browns are thinking, maybe we don't need the extra 3 corners. Maybe we feel good enough about Cam Mitchell that he could take that role, but something's got to shake there with Greg Newsome, and it's going to be interesting to see if the Browns pick up that 5th-year option on him, because that's going to tell us a lot about where the Browns are looking to plan for the next 4 or 5 years. So that 5th-year option on Greg Newsome is going to be interesting. It's also going to be interesting because the last 5th-year option that we're going to be able to talk about for a player that the Browns drafted for like legitimately 7 years. Like, think about that. Because the Browns have traded their 1st-round picks for the next 3 years, they will not be eligible to talk about a 5th-year option until the draft of 2025. You got to add, 3 years to that? Yeah, 3 years. So 2028. After this 5th-year option for Greg Newsome, we will not talk about another 5th-year option potentially until 2028. Good thing they drafted good players in between that time, right? It's a good thing they got guys like Martin Emerson. It's a good thing like they got DeJuan Jones, because if you don't hit on guys like that in the back end, this team could be talent deprived in a couple of years because all their talent is old and had to get paid. But good thing it's a really good thing that they got talent in those late rounds, like real talent in those late rounds. Because if they didn't, boy, we'd be hurting. Because again, after this 5th-year option this year, we aren't talking about another 5th-year option to 2029. That's nuts. That's nuts. But hey, it's the price of doing business. Deshaun's got to live up to it. Cap casualties. I have Jack Conklin here listed as the only cap casualty. You can't really get off of his money. That's the tricky part. You would have to trade Jack Conklin to get off of his money. It's not as simple as just cutting him because he still has some guarantees left. So you have to work out a trade. And I kind of mentioned this in a video before. I don't expect Jack Conklin to be back. I think the Browns will be able to trade him, but I would expect the compensation to be fairly weak because the Browns would care more about teams being willing to eat the money versus getting draft picks back. Remember when the Browns traded for Amari Cooper and we were like, oh my goodness, we got Amari Cooper for a 5th-round pick. Part of the reason the Browns were able to get Amari Cooper for a 5th-round pick is because they were willing to just absorb Amari Cooper's contract fully instead of asking the Cowboys to subsidize that within the trade. If the Browns wanted that contract to be subsidized in the trade, they probably would have had to trade a 3rd or a 2nd-round pick to get Amari. But since the Browns were willing to eat the contract, that made it worthwhile for the Cowboys to send him with the 5th-round pick. Now, the Cowboys, with that money, signed a wide receiver in Michael Gallup, I believe, and that ended up feeling like a mistake for them. But that's why they did the deal originally. Now, the Browns will be in a similar situation where they're betting on DeJuan Jones to step up as the right tackle, and they might be able to get rid of Jack Conklin's, I think he's $20 million cap hit, by trading him to somebody who's willing to take the hit for a mid to late round draft pick, right? A 5th or 6th round draft pick. So if you're willing to take the hit and bet on an injury-prone player who is also an all-pro level player, because you really want to fix your right tackle situation, you could trade for you could trade for Jack Conklin, and in return, you'll take the money, we'll get a 5th-round pick, and we'll save 20 mil and get a fifth, and hopefully that 20 mil can be used for somebody. But that's another way that the Browns could save some money. Now, why would the Browns want to save money? Well, there are guys out there that I think are going to become cap casualties that are going to be of key interest to the Cleveland Browns. I have 4 names who I think are going to be able to be got by their current teams because of changing circumstances, and because of money owed and the opportunity being there to get these guys to be either cap casualties or regime change casualties. DeAndre Hopkins is the one I got biggest circled on the list. Like, if you ask me what was the one element in this Browns passing attack that they missed, and I would say it's somebody like a D-Hop where you could throw a 50-50 ball up, especially when Deshaun Watson was in at quarterback. I felt like that was one of the things that they missed the most. So getting a guy like a D-Hop, who we still know is very good and able to help, and then pairing him with an Amari Cooper and then an Elijah Moore, I think will be very interesting. In that same vein, a Mike Williams will also be interesting as well. The Browns are going to be, I think this is going to be the year where the Browns are going to go all in on making sure they know for a fact if this Deshaun Watson thing can work. And part of that is putting Deshaun Watson in the best situation possible where there's no excuses, and you even want to add some familiar faces around him so he can have that instant chemistry, right? And I think that Mike Williams and D-Hop are going to be 2 of the guys that the Browns are going to target that are going to be available, because Mike Williams is a prime cap casualty for the Chargers, and D-Hop, he's not necessarily like a useless player for them, right? But he is somebody who was brought in for a team that was trying to win now, but now they fired their coach and they're kind of in limbo, and it doesn't really make sense to have D-Hop anymore for them. So D-Hop might be able to get had, or maybe they cut him for the salary cap benefits of getting rid of his contract. Either way, I think you could get D-Hop if you really want him. And I think the Browns are going to be on the list of teams that really want him. I think they're going to want to surround Deshaun around as much things that he's been successful with as possible, because this is the year where they're going to make that final decision. Right? Like, do we rock with this past 2024, or after this year with Deshaun Watson, do we start to make the moves to move off of him? Like, this year is going to be critical in that. And I think the Browns are using this year to make that determination. Like, are we going to prepare for Deshaun Watson being the face of the franchise for the next 6 years? Or are we going to prepare for possibly moving on from Deshaun Watson as early as this summer? They want to know this season. And in order to know, they're going to make some moves like bringing in guys who he's ultra familiar with, right? You know, D-Hop, or Mike Williams, somebody like that who he has chemistry with. They're going to try to bring him in here, and get more receivers that kind of fit his natural style of play, so they can know exactly what they have, because they also need to know, if this ain't going to be it, we got to move on to the next thing, right? The one thing about Andrew Berry that people love and hate about him, and I think ultimately makes this Browns team better, is that Andrew Berry is relentlessly and ruthlessly always looking for an upgrade at any position, including quarterback. And if he determines that Deshaun ain't going to be enough, he's going to make the moves and start to get the stuff going to get the next quarterback. Because remember, 2025 is the first year where the Browns have their first round pick again. So not only do they have the first round pick, they also have access in trades to their first round pick this year, and their first round pick next year, and their first round pick the year before. So if the Browns want to do something crazy like trade three first again, they can do that as early as 2025 offseason, right? But before that, they're kind of locked into what they have right now. So they got to figure out what they have with Deshaun. And I think this is going to be an all-in type season to figure out, what do we really have here? Is this worth committing to for the next few years, or should we start to move off of this starting as early as this summer? They're going to make that determination this year for sure. If Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry were on the hot seat this year, right? If this year was an evaluation of should we keep Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski around for the next 5 years, then next year is that same evaluation on Deshaun Watson. Will this team continue to keep him going forward? Will they start to make the moves to get off of him? It's all determined on what happens here. And because last year went the way it did with Deshaun, this team's not going to be so married to the ideal of making it work with him. And I think that, hey, if he struggles a little bit, this isn't going to be, we're going to fire the coach to make it work for you, Deshaun. This is going to be, we're going to move on because this just isn't working. We can sit out the last couple of years of this deal and just start the rebuild now if you're not going to be good enough. So, look at what teams are doing around the league, what Denver has done with Russ. The Browns could be in that same boat trying to move on with him on the team or with him off the team in some capacity. If this year doesn't work, I really think that he's going to be a bit on the hot seat this year in a way that he's kind of never been in his career. So it's going to be interesting to see how Deshaun responds to that pressure. But part of being on the hot seat means they're going to give you everything you need to succeed. And if he can succeed with everything there, then he'll be all right. So that's one of those things. I think Keenan Allen would be also somebody to look at, a real possession receiver. He might be a little bit cheaper, experienced guy. And then Khalil Mack might be somebody that they look at to anchor the other side of Miles if they can't get a deal done with Zadarius Smith. The other Brown that I think is going to be gone is Anthony Walker. And this is the only Brown that I think outright just is not returning that's on that list. A-Walk, I don't think he has the purpose that he had anymore. He was leadership guy. He was kind of one of the main faces holding it down at linebacker. But now I think this team has kind of outgrown him. And I think that they need different play styles at linebacker that Anthony Walker doesn't necessarily fit. Now, they might bring him back on a super cheap deal, but if there's any demand for Anthony Walker this offseason, I expect him to go elsewhere. But if he just kind of sits around and he's there when camp's around on a cheap deal, they'll probably bring him back. But if there's any interest available around the league around him, then he'll probably go somewhere else. But that's my list of guys who might be gone, what the Browns free agency kind of cap situation is going to look at. I hope you guys appreciate the more thorough, in-depth approach that I tried to take here with not only talking about players that I think might be gone, but why players might get extended, restructured, and what the impact on the salary cap might be, and what the long-term planning of things like Greg Newsome's fifth-year option and who the Browns surround Deshaun Watson with at wide receiver, why those decisions might be made. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I appreciate every single one of y'all. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.